Karl Kasarda from InRangeTV explains the Second Amendment for All movement and how he gets his message out despite YouTube's gun restrictions. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. No, the devil's got no hold on me. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news and analysis over hot takes and opinion, which I think is somewhat rare in our media landscape, but that's what we try to do here at The Reload. This week, we are going to be discussing the gun rights movement and some of the differences within it and different points of view that exist. And to do that, we are going to be talking with Karl Kasarda from InRangeTV. Welcome to the show, Karl.
Hey, thanks for having me. And right off the bat, the one thing I want to say I appreciate is when you mention a sober approach to the topic is one of the things that we definitely need in this space is more maturity regarding any of the topics, whether it's gun rights or just the firearms themselves, because they're so often just treated as novelties or toys, and they're not that.
Yeah, thank you. No, and you know, for me, when I launched The Reload a couple years ago, my thought was, and this is a pretty common thing, like a lot of gun owners understand about major media, that it's not very well informed on firearms, how they function, why people own them, what the gun laws are, how they work, that sort of thing. And so you see a lot of mistakes born from just lack of knowledge in major media reporting. And then on the other side, in gun media, I think oftentimes you have a lack of understanding about how the political world works in practice, and a lot of ignorance on that front. And so I think there's like a nice little niche in there where for a hard news outlet that which we do analysis as well, but that tries to approach this issue from a independent and informed point of view that focuses on reporting so it's worked out okay so far. We're not a media juggernaut or anything like that, but I thought there was an opening there, and that's what we try to fill. I think you with InRange are filling a niche as well that is perhaps there's more demand for than there is supply at this point. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about InRange for people who don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, InRange is ostensibly a firearms channel. I mean, most of the content is gun reviews or or teaching people or educating on how firearms work or using optics or competition and all of those things that are based around it. But it's more nuanced than that. It's more of like a cultural channel that happens to have firearms as the axis to the spoke of many different topics that spiral out from it. So on the channel as well, you'll find historical content, such as I did a series about the Underground Railroad and the people that were helping refugee enslaved people escape to the north or up into Canada, and how firearms related to that, because every one of these types of movements, whether they are cultural, social, or political, so many of them that had to make a difference inevitably involved firearms, because we live in a world awash with firearms. And so for one side, for lack of a better phrase, to have them than another means that you have a vacuum in terms of who can use, sadly, violence as a manipulative tool or for defense. And so I try to cover a lot of topics in that regard. Like I said, the Underground Railroad. I've got some others about community defense against the Klan and things like that. So I think guns need to be taken into a larger perspective of conversation than just objects or sporting tools, which they are that too, but how much they've affected our culture and world in terms of good and bad. And I try to do that with the whole on a more holistic approach with InRange.
Yeah, and there's entertainment stuff too, right? The mud test, things like that.
Oh yeah, mud tests, and then some of them, while it still deals with topics of violence, I do Old West vignettes, which talk about like a more realistic approach to what the Old West was like and what quote unquote shootouts were, and kind of demystify what Hollywood's done to make it a more realistic thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And and it is a unique approach, I think, for the most part, because your biggest gun channels, and InRange is very popular. I think people have known it for a long time, but your really big gun channels, a lot of them tend not to delve into the political side of firearms, either history or modern politics, as much, right? And so that's one way that you stand out. And then the other way, I think, is just your point of view on it, right? One of the reasons I want to have you on is you had a video that you put out recently. It was that discussed, firearms for all, or gun rights for all, the Second Amendment for all, and why that's become something of a controversial topic within especially the online gun rights movement, and some of the backlash that you've dealt with, and some of your criticism of other creators in this space. So, I think you have a unique spot in this media landscape, in the gun tuber landscape, whatever you want to call it. And I find that your views very interesting, and I wanted to have you on to discuss some of that. So let's get into that part, I guess, here. Like, what? First off, why don't you explain to us a little bit about the main thrust of that video, this idea of Second Amendment for all, and what makes it controversial in your view, and also the right, I guess, view to have.
Yeah, it's surprising that it's controversial to me, but it's unfortunately a conclusion I had to come to with the reality of what I saw with my work with the channel and with the community at large. So 2A for all is simply a phrase that coins the idea that right, the Second Amendment, which is, of course, enshrined in the American Bill of Rights, our Second Amendment, is that the right to firearms essentially is for everyone. It's for anyone that's within the United States. Now, that said, of course, the other Bill of Rights apply as well, the first through the 10th, in terms of application across the entire swath of people. But in my mindset, the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment and all of them that are encoded in there are not something that were granted to us because we're Americans. They were really just writing down something that should exist for all humans. They were recognizing a human right by enshrining it in the Constitution. Now, remember, when the Constitution was first written, it didn't actually have the Bill of Rights, and everyone's like, we're not signing that till you put this in there. And then they did. But what it did is it acknowledged things that should be basically a human right across the board and put them and codified them into law for the United States, which makes us different in that regard, slightly. But
Sure.
2A for all stands for, at least within the United States, I believe very strongly that anyone has the right for self-defense, and that means the right to firearms.
Right, and yeah. that basic premise there, that the right to self-defense is a natural human right that is not given by the Constitution but protected by it. That's a pretty widely held view in the gun community, right?
And I feel like it is.
So.
I feel like it should be, and I used to think it was. So that's.
So what makes you? What is it? I guess where you think you're seeing conflict with this idea in the broader community? Yeah.
So I've been doing the gun thing for a long time. It's been part of my world, and I've been a competitive shooter for decades, and doing InRange now for 10 years. The thing that really brought light to this in a way that I was personally even surprised about was one of the things I like to do on the channel is occasionally, if there's a new content creator out there, and it's hard to build a new channel in this space that we're in. If I see a content creator out there that I think is really doing something interesting or unique, or in a way that just, I don't know, brings attention to me in a way that others do not, I like to reach out to them and highlight them and say, hey, why don't you come and do a Q&A on my channel? It's a way to introduce other content creators to an audience that exists, like give a little boost. And now it's years ago, but someone that I saw doing good work was Tactical Girlfriend. She's a trans woman with a channel that's doing amazing stuff and unique stuff and very educational. And when I saw her content, I watched it for a while. I'm like, this person's doing something very cool. And I invited her to do a Q&A on the channel. And we did that. And in the Q&A, we actually didn't talk about trans rights or gender politics or anything about that. We talked about guns, doing a gun channel, shooting competitions. That's all we did. And the vitriol that I still to this day now, years later, receive from that one video has been shocking, disturbing, and eye-opening in a way that I could not ignore what was happening within this space. I have a co-host on my show, Russell Fagan, who's part of KE Arms, and it was also a similar experience to him, because anyone that you say this to and tell people in our gun circles, most of the time, I don't think people want to they either don't see it or they don't want to see it because they're not necessarily directly impacted by it. But the stuff that has flowed into my channel and through the comments, but also through community response, has made it impossible to ignore that there's at least a burgeoning, if not significant enough amount within the firearm space of people that do not believe that this right should be for everyone, that I realized it was something that had to be dealt with and addressed is a better word, directly.
Hmm. Okay. And so there was all this backlash from working with, a trans gun owner and content creator. And that's what kind of, I guess, did that make you want to become a little bit more outspoken on the issue, or were you already?
Okay. So I was already of the mindset that I believe that these rights are for everyone, because that's just who I am. That's my core DNA. And the content on InRange before that already showed that. Like, for example, I mentioned the Underground Railroad videos existed before that Q&A happened. But the response that came back from that was so broad and so significant, it's still going on to this moment today, made me, to me, I felt like when you have a space where you have a voice, whether that's been via luck or privilege or accident or through your own hard work or all of that combined, like having a significant YouTube channel, seeing something like that being either endorsed or ignored feels immoral to me. And I feel compelled that it's the only right thing to do is to do something about it. And so in that regard, I started doing more videos addressing that issue, like this one that you're referencing here, and have been a unique, I guess, minority voice in the larger gun tube sphere in regards to this. And that in and of itself helped solidify my concern of what we were dealing with, because we haven't seen too many other people backing up that message in a way that they should, considering the topic they're dealing with.
And is this something that concerns you mainly because you're, a believer in trans rights, or a believer in gun rights and you think it undermines gun rights, or is it, I guess, a combination of those things?
I'm a believer in human rights, and I think that when it comes to things, the Bill of Rights and rights as they're applied are most important to protect for the marginalized in our community, whoever that is at the moment. And that changes over time. So, for example, like I mentioned, I keep mentioning the Underground Railroad, but when you think about firearms rights and the rights to self-defense pre-Civil War, well, who were they removed from? The enslaved people, of course. They weren't allowed to own guns or have the right to defend themselves or even be literate. So at that time, at that moment, the most important issue to tackle in terms of rights for human beings, not just gun rights, rights across the board, was that issue of enslaved and enslaved people. But now what we're dealing with is society, for whatever reason, always wants to have or seems to need to have someone to punch down at. And whoever that group is are the people that are most at risk of losing their rights and the most important ones to speak out for, if you can, regardless of whether it's trans rights or gender issues or any reason of marginalization, racial issues, religious issues, whoever, like World War II, of course, Judaism and the Jews being oppressed for their religion. Like they would, at that moment, it doesn't matter what group, if it's a group that's being targeted specifically and they are being punched down at, to use that term, that's the one you stand up for, because they're the ones currently in target and in focus of the system.
Mm-hmm. And, what are your goals with these sort of videos that you're making? Especially, I guess, first off, in the gun tuber space, like what do you hope to accomplish? What do you want to see other creators do, in response to some of the work that you're doing here?
I want to see us as a whole, as Americans, not just gun tubers, as a society. I want to see us to embrace the ideals that America supposedly stands up for, which is liberty and rights for all. And when I see people actively trying to, whether it is the political system itself or just the individual community, actively persecuting members of that have interest in that space just because of their identity, that is not us living up to our ideals, in my opinion. That is something else. And so I don't necessarily want to tell anyone else to do, because that's definitely not how I function. But what I would like to see is for us to live up to our ideals, that these rights are for everyone, and have a bigger, broader tent, regardless of if it's the issue of the Second Amendment or otherwise. Because the more people that exercise these rights and the more people that embrace them, regardless of other ideological differences, the more likely we are to retain them. And so if you are ultimately someone that believes in the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment, the more people that are on board with you on that, the better your cause is, regardless of other differences. But more importantly, I just want to see us live up to our ideals as Americans, and decent human beings, to treat other people with respect, regardless of our identitarian differences. And so when a group is being specifically persecuted, and believe me, they absolutely are, it's the stuff that I see now as a result of pulling back that curtain is hard to not look away from anymore, sadly. It's significant, it is dangerous, and it's sometimes now, as we're seeing already, being codified into law. And so these are people that absolutely need their right to self-defense, legal right to self-defense. And that in this day and age means a firearm.
And, we've been talking primarily about the online space and comments on your videos and things like that. Are you seeing a difference when you are out at, shooting events in real life or different gatherings? I know there obviously are trans gun rights groups that exist, Operation Blazing Sword and others that I've seen be included at events like the Second Amendment Foundation's annual meeting. Not so much maybe at the other gun rights events, but do you think this is something that's more pronounced online than it is in person? What's been your experience?
I do think I have to say that on the online sphere that we all live in now, people like to say, well, that's the internet, it's not real life. Sadly, that is less and less reality, right? The internet and real life are so intertwined that to try to dissect them from one another would be to literally break our entire societal infrastructure. You couldn't take the internet away. Your power would go out, your water would stop working, and we wouldn't communicate. It is the real world. However, I think the basic sense of anonymity that exists online draws out the bravery, I guess, of people to say things that they wouldn't necessarily always say in person. And what concerns me about that is we're there's a positive and negative to that. I think that it tends to feed upon itself and it causes more of it to exist sometimes. Like bad ideas never seem to die, right? Like in 1945, Nazism was defeated, but it's not gone. It'll always be with humanity forever. There'll be somebody that's going to think it's a good idea. And when these things spread, there's always someone else that's going to propagate that. But I think online, people are willing to sadly give you a little more vision into what they're really thinking versus what they might say at the local Walmart. And so you could say, yeah, it's hyperbolic because it's online. But I think you can also say, yeah, we're also seeing what they really think. And at that point, that is a little more concerning because some of the stuff that they're saying in larger sweeps is pretty disturbing. And some of it is endorsed on website. Endorsed maybe isn't the right word. Tolerated, if not totally accepted, on websites that are owned by large corporations that are part of our business. To go there, AR15.com is owned by Pete Brownells, which is the Second Amendment Adventure Group, which is also the people that own Brownells. And it doesn't take you long, if you look at all, for the amount of things that are being said on that website that are being allowed, that are straight out calls to violence, celebrating the Pulse gay club shooting. I've got archives of this stuff because it's all there. And to go to a website that's supposedly promoting the Second Amendment, owned by a guy that owns one of the largest firearms companies in the world, to read people celebrate a massacre of people just because they were gay, we got a problem.
And for you, like you would hold Brownells and the people who own the website at least partially responsible from some of those comments. I mean, presumably they're not coming from somebody like Pete Brownells himself. Right?
Well, no, I'm not saying he said that. I'm saying the site that they own is tolerating that, and their own code of conduct is not being enforced. So, for example, like they have rules about like only do things. I'm paraphrasing, but things that uplift the general Second Amendment community. No use of slurs. Well, it's just full of every form of horrible vitriolic slurs, and the admins do nothing, or if not, not just tolerate, they kind of join in. And so when I see that kind of stuff, by the way, yes, I admit I have a specific bone to pick with them in general because they've been threads on there stalking me and my work now for years. However, it also made me pay attention to what's going on there. And so by looking and seeing it, I'm like, this website is a huge firearms related site related to one of the largest firearms distributors owned by this guy whose name is the same as the company that distributes guns and firearms accessories and equipment. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be free speech. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you do set the tone of what sort of community you have with maybe tolerate's not the right word, but not even enforcing your code of conduct, specifically only when these slurs are against trans people. Well, that is, first of all, a violation of your own website's COC, but also you are setting the tone for your community and ultimately what you believe to some degree. Because if you're going to moderate, moderation sets tone. If you're not going to moderate, it's just free for all. Well, the tone is whatever the people make it. But when you start moderating it and use your selective moderation to set the tone, yeah, they're culpable for setting the tone. I do believe that.
Okay. So for you, it's just that they allow some of these, and I haven't looked into this personally, but for you, it's more about, they're allowing some of this stuff to go on and it reflects poorly on the company because of that.
I think it reflects poorly on the entire Second Amendment community. Anyone that's, if you were an outsider looking in and you started looking at websites that have associations to firearms related content, that's one of the websites you'd find first. Let's say you were an ignorant, I don't mean this as a negative, but like someone that's ignorant of this space coming into it new and fresh. Let's say a media investigator or reporter. You're going to find that site. And if you look around, it's going to paint a very grim and dismal image of the firearms community. Even if that's not reflective of the community as a whole, that site and other sites like it, I'm just using this as an example, does not make us look good. And that sort of image that the firearms community has had for a long time now, it sort of becomes self-fulfilling and real if that's what we want to make us look like. And a little bit of empathy and a lot less punching down would be a lot better than what I see in so many spaces. And that's just one space. YouTube comments. Right. I mean, come on. A lot of other gun content on YouTube itself or other creators, not that far away from that either, frankly.
And when you look at the larger movement, I mean, some of these gun rights groups in particular, what is your view there on how they've operated from from where you stand? Are you happy with how the current movement is pushing things? Do you want to see different efforts made? Like what is, how are you looking at the political side of the gun rights movement?
Well, I mean, obviously, the political side of gun rights is such a challenge in this country because you have in this two-party system we have inevitably, if you're a person that is beyond a single platform or single plank voter or a single plank concern, you are inevitably forced to make choices where you're like, well, I'll accept that because I have to tolerate. This comes with a poison pill of all this, regardless of your political persuasion. If you're picking one side or the other, you are inevitably compromise would be a very kind term to some of the things you have to accept, regardless of which side you're interested in or believe in. So when it comes to political groups for gun rights, some are better than others. We are seeing more groups now that are forming in the vacuum to help support these alternative, and I hate that word, but new gun owner space. Like you mentioned like Operation Blazing Sword and Liberal Gun Club. And there's other groups that are forming in the vacuum because the perception, and I think to a large degree, the reality, is that the space that existed before this is so ideologically only one political persuasion that it doesn't leave a lot of air in the room for anyone that's not that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's guns have become such a polarized issue in our political system that, there's almost completely distinct positions that either party has. And the gun rights side is very much wedded to the Republican Party. And at this moment, the Donald Trump. And, I wonder how you weigh that given, Donald Trump's platform on things like trans issues, against his, support for gun rights or the Republican Party's support for gun rights, and how close gun rights groups are with like the NRA or Second Amendment Foundation or these other groups with the with Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Like, I don't, as you mentioned, it's a polarized space. It's hard to find a Democrat who is not going to support stricter gun laws at this point. And so I just wonder how you navigate all of that when you're looking at, American politics on this topic.
I can't speak for anyone besides myself, but I think in my feelings that I think most Americans, a lot of Americans, except for maybe the most polarized, are deeply disappointed in our system across the board. Like, we are not happy with any of it. There's, of course, a new regime coming into town right now, and we're going to see what they're going to do. But like, when people talk about the Republican Party being so pro-gun rights, historically speaking, legally speaking, that is demonstrably false. And they've done a lot of things against gun rights. Trump himself, swipe of the pen against the bump stock ban. He just decided that, I'm just going to decide by fiat declaration like a king that I can make this go away. How he is seen as some gun rights advocate when he does things like that is curious to me. I feel like the ideological association people have with maybe other things they agree with him on allow them to have a blind spot in the reality of what the Republican Party has done for gun rights consistently. Go back to Reagan. The minute the Black Panthers showed up with firearms, there were suddenly some gun restrictions coming to town in California that didn't exist before that. And that's Reagan, heralded as probably the greatest Republican of all time. So when it comes to gun rights and Republicans being so pro-gun rights, at best, Republicans being pro-gun rights has been for us, but not for you. Meaning, if you're with us, yeah, we're for gun rights, but if you're not, we're not. And I think we're going to see a lot of that coming in the next with the new president, frankly.
So if that's your view of it, what do you think the proper strategy is for gun rights advocates who come from your standpoint to do about that?
I think it's important for us to embrace that it is a right of all. That's where 2A for all comes from. It's very important for us to actively and vocally embrace that these are rights for everyone, and to make it a big tent topic. That I may not agree with you on economic issues. I may not agree with you on whatever topic, but when it comes to the topic of the rights for all, meaning the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, or any of the other enumerated Bill of Rights, that we're all Americans and we're all in this together, and that if we embrace it as a big tent issue versus a marginalizing for me but not for you, that's the way to best address a problem in which both parties really aren't on your side. And so all of us together make it a much harder thing to do something about than all of us fragmented. It's like the old Revolutionary War snake, like cut into pieces. Together we're stronger. And so I think that the algorithms, social media, the media in general has done a very good job of weaponizing Americans against Americans. And sadly, that level of vitriol that's existing in many directions has caused us to lose sight of the realities of regardless of class, we have a lot of problems together that we need to solve. And basic human rights shouldn't even be the one we're arguing about.
And so what do you think that looks like in practice? Is it like criticizing Trump and Republicans if they don't on the policies they put into place specifically on firearms, or maybe trying to look at some of the policies they're putting into place that would have an ancillary effect on firearms of groups of people? What do you think is going to be the most effective way forward from your point of view?
I think it goes broad scope. I think everything has to be addressed from in every direction possible to address it. There's not one particular solution. There's got to be multiple things, multiple strategies at once working towards a similar goal. So it's
less about specifically criticizing Trump, I guess. And
I don't know that critique works very well. And I don't think that the legal system is necessary. It's not just Trump, right? It's like the legal system has been problematic from the bottom up for many people for many reasons for as long as this country has existed. So it could be as bad as your local homeowners association all the way up to the executive branch. But yeah, so on the legal side, laws that are absolutely demonstrably and clearly constitutionally illegal should be challenged with law. That's what happens. People challenge them. And that's where gun rights organizations tend to do their best work. You have like, GOA or whoever else, or NRA and others, many of them, and maybe sometimes working together, frequently working against each other, which is another puzzle. But like that should be challenged in the courts. This is illegal. This is not constitutional, and get it shot down. That's one strategy. Another strategy, though, is to just build community. And what I mean by that is people that either want to have firearms because they're just interested in them, need, or maybe need is the word, need them because of whoever they are, as long as they're a legal possessor, feel the need because of whatever situation they're in to have it for their own personal security then and self-defense, then working together to make a larger, better, well-educated, and I guess as the Constitution said, well-regulated, meaning well-trained, capable, meaning not negligent or treating these things like toys. The more people that do this together as a bigger tent, the harder it is for them to make the change. Because when there's a small minority of us screaming about a specific thing, it's easy to shut that down. But when the majority of people are like, no, we're not on board, it's a much harder thing to do. And so I think it goes from the top down. You've got the legal, but you've also got the community grassroots, for lack of a better term, building that community larger and embracing the right, and a right unexercised will eventually go away. So if we use it and use it responsibly, it's much harder for them to do much about.
And so speaking of that side of things, building community, obviously getting your message out there. This is something you've been effectively working on with mainly through YouTube for the last decade, as you said. And I'm interested in some of the struggles involved with that. And so you have a fairly unique approach to YouTube. We've covered a lot of the different social media policies and how they shift and how their vagueness can be an issue, and inconsistent application of moderation rules, especially on YouTube, has been a major topic of coverage for us at the Reload. And I think InRange, you've taken a pretty different approach from a lot of other channels on how to deal with all that. So can you just get into first, just explain a little bit about how how you work as an organization, like as a business, or I mean, just how you actually are able to do this work or put out the videos that you make, that sort of thing. What is your approach? Because it's a little different.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, this goes back now. When InRange started, it actually wasn't on YouTube. It was on a fledgling thing called Full 30, which was an attempt to not be on YouTube. From the very beginning, I wasn't a fan of what we were seeing with YouTube back then. And we're talking 11 years ago now. Think about what today. But ultimately, the reality of that was that it proved that there was nowhere. YouTube has for a monopoly of control over the eyeballs of viewers. Anywhere else you go, you are going to struggle at best to get people to see your content. YouTube has become the de facto standard of video distribution on the internet, and anywhere else that does that is niche or ignored at best. So one of the ways, of course, to be able to finance a project through YouTube is to monetize your channel and rely on YouTube's advertising dollars in tandem to the amount of views you get to make money from them or through them. But that's what a lot of people do. That's what most do, right? And so what I did with InRange is, in the video now that's I think 8 years old, I proactively demonetized the channel. I deleted the channel's AdSense account. AdSense is the intermediary between you and YouTube and how you get the money. And that video's up. And then turned off monetization on all of my work. So what I did is essentially I said, if YouTube isn't going to be a collaborative organization in terms of helping out the people that are helping make them money, then why am I helping make them money? So by proactively demonetizing the channel, essentially I'm using their network to distribute the content, but without their ad dollars. It's completely crowdsourced and crowdfunded, and that has been viable, frankly, because of Patreon. There are others. There were, I mean, if you remember the old days, Subscribestar was one of them, but Patreon and Player are the two major ones where instead of asking YouTube and their algorithm to monetize my work, I've said that if you want to see InRange survive, please help consider supporting it. And we are a completely crowd-funded project. So YouTube, InRange now exists for those 8+ years because there's enough of a viewer base that believes in what we're doing and the message to put their money in a pot and keep it alive. So it's funny because a lot of my detractors like to call me names and slurs and commie and all that kind of nonsense. But frankly, I think that's the most capitalist approach I could take. I said, I don't want your ad dollars. I'm going to sell my product to people who are willing to buy it. And if you don't want it, don't. And that's what's happened. And that's what I'm doing. On top of that, decentralized distribution of content is still important. I would warn anyone creating content to not trust the overlords of YouTube to keep your content safe. So make sure you're decentralizing your distribution. And InRange is decentralized in its distribution. You can find InRange lots of places besides YouTube, but YouTube accounts for like 97% of views.
Right. That's interesting though. So your choice to demonetize was less about avoiding the extra layer of moderation and rules that they put onto monetized videos, and more about sort of boycotting their way of making money off of your content.
Yeah, it was liberation. So, I mean, yeah, so like we're seeing this right now. Again, there's always every month or every year or every so many months, there's the new YouTube controversy where a bunch of content creators, especially in GunTube land, have to go and retroactively delete videos or worry about getting strikes. And that's still a reality, monetized or not. But like when they have multiple policies, right? They have one that they suddenly decided verboten and then strike your channel for. Could happen tomorrow. But then they also have their monetization policies. And their monetization policies are, well, we won't strike your video, but you can't do these things. And for me, I'm like, I don't want to obey any of your rules. I want to do the content I want to do. And I don't want your advertising dollars to manipulate my content creation. So if I want to create work, if I was dependent on YouTube and their monetization, I would ultimately have to change the type of content I'm making just to comply with their monetization rules. And that's not the content I want to make. I want to make the content I want to make for the audience that hopefully will appreciate it. And some advertising dollars dictating whether that's right or wrong is a foul taste to my mouth. So it's more about liberation away from corporate. Now we're seeing this very specifically. Corporate, and I used that phrase 8 years ago, the oligarchy of the internet, not letting them tell me what to do, frankly.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, at the Reload, we're sort of on YouTube and not of it, if that makes any sense. Because we don't, obviously, we post this podcast on YouTube, but we don't make YouTube content. It's not made for YouTube necessarily. So we're a little bit different. We do have a similar monetization model as you, in that we're 100% member funded, but it's, that's a rare thing for video content, I think, especially. And it's been successful, it seems like, thus far. I mean, presumably you're going to be able to continue to make content as things stand today?
As long as the community is willing to support the project, we'll be doing it. And so far, we're still here. So, and I'm very appreciative of the people that are there to do that. I mean, it's an interesting situation in which, in that you have to get enough views, whether they're on YouTube or otherwise, there's always going to be some attrition. When you have people supporting a project, I'm sure you see this with your own. People have problems. They can't pay their power bill that month or whatever. Churn. So the first thing they're going to cut is their $5 to InRange. And I get that. Of course they are. Or whatever. So attrition is a natural state of the universe. So you have to still get your message out to a broad enough audience in spite of the YouTube algorithm, which I have lots of thoughts about that thing.
And that's actually a question I have for you.
Yeah.
With this concept of proactively demonetizing on YouTube as a gun creator, while it doesn't subject you to the same sort of rules that they put on what I think most gun YouTubers have to deal with, who've used the more traditional model for revenue, YouTube is also less incentivized to show people your videos, right? Because YouTube's goal is to show somebody a video that they can run an ad against, because that's how YouTube makes money. So have you noticed that, and how do you deal with that?
One would think that that's the case, and there's probably some truth to that. But I think the ways of the YouTube black box is almost indiscernible, and what they decide to promote and not promote. Well, I'm sure monetization is part of that mathematical algorithm. The reality is it's not the only one, and the fact of what they're promoting this week versus next week changes. Like, one week it'll be this, they want 10-minute videos, then they want 30-second videos, then they want 1 hour videos, but then they want topics about flowers, but not about guns. But this week they want guns.
Yeah.
They just do that. It's on the back end. You don't know who or why.
I've noticed that.
There's no rhyme or reason to it.
They used to like podcast clips, and not anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. And for a moment, they're shorts, right? Shorts. You could post a short, you get 1 million views. Now shorts, not so much. And it's like, that's just how they function. The thing that I think that is most insidious, I guess I'm not answering your question. I don't know. I can't tell, because,
I guess it could be that they don't have an impact, because I get they want to show you ads, but they want to keep you on the site so they can show you ads. So
yes. So, like,
if
for
somebody
example,
likes your videos,
every once in a while, like, I can look at how you can look at the analytics on your channel, and I can see that they're doing stuff. They're doing manipulative things. It's obvious to me. So, like, many of the videos hit a certain number of views and then just suddenly plank. They go up, 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 and then stop, and they just stop. And that doesn't happen naturally. They're doing that. Something's happening with the algorithm. And then another video, rare once in a while, I've got one about Turkish Glocks. That one's at 350,000 views. Why? Unclear. But they've decided this one's okay and this one's not, or this one's to be promoted and this one's not. People, this is the sad reality of the state of affairs with YouTube. I don't think doing good work and good content is important and part of the process. But the reality is YouTube's going to decide what succeeds or not based on their whim. And I don't even know if it's a person versus a machine that they're punching data into and just letting it do its thing, or maybe a combination thereof. But ultimately, they decide what succeeds and what fails. And it has very little to do with the content. I think one of the things we have to have a realization with on the internet as a whole is that when YouTube monetized and allowed monetization of content amongst other platforms, the reality is you are, to a degree, their employee. But for some reason, they're allowed to treat you like you're not. And that's a big, I think we're going to have a big realization of what that means in the long run for a lot of people.
That's a lot of the modern internet economy, right?
Yeah, they found a real cool niche where they can essentially have hundreds, millions of people creating them free content, making money on it, and then treat those people as irrelevant. And that's a problem.
Interesting. So, last question for you. Just where do you see things going with InRange down in the future from here? How are you pursuing, the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
I think that right now the big thing to do for InRange is one of the things we've been trying to do, and successfully, and I must say with the help of community, is build community. So we have actual real world events. We call brutality matches. They're competitions, and we have a lot of our core audience and supporters sign up for that. And we have them around the country, and we get together and actually break bread and touch grass together and do what we enjoy, which is shoot guns. And that's where people actually make new friends, real friends, not just an alias of a name on the internet. They meet each other in person. Those differences, if there are any, suddenly became way less relevant when they're there having a good time together, and it builds bridges. So I think we're at a point now where the most important thing we can do as an alternative space is to build more of that community and build more friendships and build more community defense in terms of just knowing each other and being there for one another. And that's what I want to focus on in the next year, really, is content creation, but also making sure that that community is growing strong and healthy, and that we're building that together in the real world, not just the internet.
And where can people go if they want to, find out more about that and join your community or go to one of the events?
Thank you. So you can find out, I have InRange.tv, where you can just find out about InRange in general. InRange.tv/watch will show you all of my decentralized distribution points. And if you're interested in those real world events, our matches that we run, the brutality events, you can find those at brutalitymatches.org.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And one of the questions you asked is, how do you grow when you're not monetized? And one of them is being able to have a conversation with you on another channel and maybe reaching an audience that doesn't already know about the work, and vice versa, because I'll share this with mine. So that's where we help each other out in the long run, regardless of those internet oligarchs. So thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll have to have you on again in the future because I enjoyed talking to you, and I think you got a unique worldview that deserves more attention. So I appreciate you doing this.
I would love to be here, and again, appreciate the time and the opportunity, and thanks for having me.
All right, wonderful. I'm going to send it over to myself to tell people about the ad swap we have with another member-supported independent publication called The Dispatch. So I'm going to hand it off to future self now. All right, folks, it's time to talk a little bit about The Dispatch, doing an ad swap here between The Reload and The Dispatch. And I think that's fitting because if you like what you're getting from The Reload in terms of high-quality reporting that focuses on hard news, you'll probably like The Dispatch as well because, get this, they also focus on high-quality reporting and hard news. Now, they are a much broader publication than The Reload. We obviously focus on one specific area, whereas The Dispatch has a much larger team and is able to focus on a whole number of other issues, but still primarily in that national politics realm like we do here at The Reload. But they are one of my favorite publications. I am a paying member to The Dispatch, and so clearly, I highly recommend it. I've been a paying member since they were founded, and I've never had reason to rethink that even once. So they are constantly breaking news stories. They are sending you newsletters on whatever frequency you want. They have quite a variety of them over there. But I subscribe, for instance, to the Morning Dispatch, and I get, I think, a very nice summary of what's really going on from a pretty sober perspective. That newsletter is hard news and it's focused on it. And I think it's fantastic, but they also, of course, have some of the best commentators, in my personal opinion, over there as well. It was an outlet founded by Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg, two guys I've known for a long time. They've been on the Reloads podcast. Kevin Williamson as well has been on our podcast. So you've heard from these guys if you've been a Reload listener for a while here. And, I think you should check out The Dispatch if you haven't already. We have a free trial as well, 30-day free trial for Reload listeners if you want to go over and check out their paid offering, which I think is well worth the money. So I'd encourage you to do that. There's a link in the description of this podcast or on our website if you want to check it out. So head over to The Reload or to get that link, or head over to The Dispatch to see what they're all about.